Good morning and welcome to 89.1 The Roar. We are streaming live from the studio of WXVU.org on Villanova University campus. Our extraordinary person of interest today is Jerry Waxler. Jerry has a master's degree. He's also a licensed practicing counselor, a speaker, a writing coach, a group facilitator, and a therapist. He has dedicated himself to helping others find their skill and confidence to write memoirs about themselves. He's the author of 5 books, which he will tell us about.
I'm just so passionate about the impact that trauma has on people, whether it's trauma of protesting, which I don't think when you're protesting you realize that you're in a traumatic situation. I watched kids get beat and put into the hospital for protesting, but of course nothing even remotely like combat trauma. But there's trauma of child abuse, there's trauma of alcoholic parenting, there's trauma of busy parents who neglect their kids, and all of it puts a tremendous burden on individuals to figure out who they are and how to grow. So, sure, I want to talk or help or reach to anybody who wants to figure out how to become comfortable in their own skin and comfortable in their own lives. And
I just wanted to jump in. I've been taking a memoir class with Jerry for a few weeks, and I think the most impressive thing I heard from one of the people in the class was that it took him 11 years to get over his wife's passing, and he didn't do so until he started to write about it. So you really get a sense of what writing can do for people. It can complete them, it can get them over trauma, it can just put a silence to the pain that you're feeling. So it's I think it's very important that you do write, and I often think that's something we should teach our youth, that when you're upset, maybe you should write about it. Now, Jerry wrote a book, Learn to Write Your Memoir in Weeks. So it doesn't have to be a prescription on, there's no really way to write your memoir. You can write it any way you want. You could journal. You can have a diary. John,
Yes.
You could write your memoir. In storytelling, you could do it any way you want. A step-by-step guide to record the stories of your life. So it doesn't even have to be chronological.
I was actually going to do it in vignettes.
That's great.
I was going to do it on a typewriter. I do have a typewriter that I inherited.
So you have to wait till your hand heals now.
Well, as soon as my hand heals, yeah, we'll do that.
so one of the things that I was amazed in my 50s to look back on was how many different stages my life had been through. Starting out in a super aggressive, competitive high school in Philadelphia, and then when I get to Wisconsin, instead of focusing on school, I was focused mainly on just trying to survive in an unfamiliar environment. So getting out of school, I kind of floundered and was looking for myself and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. And I didn't get into counseling until I was 50. So the journey to find myself was a lifelong journey. And one of the things that I love about teaching memoirs is helping or witnessing what other people go through in order to find themselves throughout their lives. It's like you're not finished just because you're stuck in a job, or you're not finished, or even if you're not stuck in a job, if you're a lawyer but you think, well, what am I going to do after I'm a lawyer? I think there's just so many stages in life that can be challenging and expanding and deepening. So I'm a big champion of all of that.
I think that, just my own observation from reading your book, that I think writing your memoirs, however you write them, is a confessional in a way of your life. And I think it takes a lot of courage to write.
Or there's three things. There's ordinary life, where you just walk around and just live your life. Then there's therapy, where you say, I need to figure something out. I'm trying to understand myself. And then a therapist asks questions, and you are in a private space with someone who's asking you to dig into your own thoughts and feelings. So that's kind of a baby step towards opening up, sharing parts of yourself that you ordinarily wouldn't share. And one of the awesome things about therapy is that people discover that they're not going to die if they share some of those very private things, because a therapist is trained to kind of hear it all and listen to it all and make sense of it all. And a memoir writer takes that to a whole nother level, because now you're doing that on the page. You're sharing how you felt and what you were going through, but you're telling it in a story that you're willing to share with others. So it's kind of almost like a continuum through the very, very, very private place that most of us have our inner lives, and a gradual opening towards sharing and being open and being transparent. And then in the therapy world, we call it authentic, or maybe in the New Age world, you say, I want to be an authentic person, and that's the goal that I seek and still do, and strive to be open. And it's not easy. When you write the memoir, you're introducing story crafting into the telling of it. So you have an opportunity to translate those feelings of, oh, I have to hide this could never come out, into, this makes a powerful story. So as you develop a story about who you were, so when you're ashamed of something, I did this terrible thing, I'm going to tuck it away, it's only there in these embarrassing or shameful memories, yuck, let me just try to forget that, versus an entirely different approach to it, where you're developing it into a story that can be shared, and you can kind of look at it and say, oh, okay, well, when I had that affair, my wife and I had been separated for 3 years, or yeah, I made a mistake, that was horrible, or something like that. But you're developing it into a rich understanding, and then the next stage in memoir writing is not just the confession of what went wrong, but the courage and the strength and the self-development of how you grew to the next stage in your life. The courage of you having to face your own strength, and for you to develop your own strength in the story. So instead of just a bad memory, it becomes a story of a person who's trying to grow through changes. And that's where the first impulse is to say, oh, I could never reveal that. But then as you allow yourself to go deeper into the story writing mentality, it's kind of a way of looking at things. You create a sense of unfolding, like a saga. And it's just so much more real and so much more humanizing. The other thing that happens in human psychological experience is that when we hide things, we feel like we're cut off from them. So you're cutting yourself off from parts of yourself. And by crafting the whole thing together into a story, it shapes it into something that's entirely you.
For those that want to write their memoirs, I think one of the biggest hurdles is, like you said, owning up to your past. And then, is there some backlash where people might reject you? Have you ever noticed, has that ever come up in your therapy where people said, I wrote it, somebody read it, I shared it? Because I think that's one fear. And then the second thing I wanted to point out was, is the object of writing a memoir to help others, is that one of the goals in hopes that, okay, I went through this, let me help others just understand that they can get through this also?
Yeah, multiple. So a couple questions. There are two questions there. Is there or could there be a backlash? So keeping in mind that you are in control of it. I've heard like these reality shows where they swoop in and ask, I think you might have even told the story, they kind of ask you to sign contracts and then you belong to them and they can do, get anything they want out of you. But a memoir is yours. And if you can write around things, you can feel out people.
What do you think about the effect of screen time on children and adults, children, teenagers, and adults in the left and right brain theory?
Yeah. So there's a left and right brain theory, but there's also a top and bottom brain. So it's quadrants, really. And the bottom part of our brains are in charge of emotion. And so if we feel we're in danger, we become very, very, very alert. And if we feel there's a reward, we become very, very, very alert. So if you're hungry and you smell a donut, your whole evolution has put the machinery in place for you to kind of go towards that donut. And the screens are designed to trap you in that fascination part of your brain. And so you don't need to think, you don't need to feel, you just need to go. Well, you do need to feel, but you need to just sort of go with that emotion. It's very addictive, so I'm sure it's $1 trillion industry and very much geared towards collecting eyeballs. So I think all of us have begun to notice that it's addictive in us, and the influence on children is being studied, but it's yet to be really, we're in an 8 billion person experiment right now with raising children in front of screens, and I think it's I didn't grow up that way. I don't want to comment on whether I think it's right or not. I don't think there is a right or wrong here. I think it's just watching people, watching culture move towards its own, satisfying its own desires and making a couple bucks at it. And I don't know. It's a strange thing.
We are WXVU.org, streaming worldwide, Villanova University campus, with one of its alum, Jerry Waxler. I think the Waxler thing was part of my Delco accent, so you have to forgive me for that.
There's a lot more Waxlers.
It's actually a common mistake. That's why I always say WAXLER.
What I wanted to say to you was, I would think, even if it's Zoom, that in order to be successful as a memoir writer, participant, it's almost like being in an AA or an Al-Anon meeting. You have to confess, unless you want to lie. If you're lying and you want to leave things out of your memoirs, that's what I'm struggling with right now, listening to it.
Confessing. So I don't think of it that way just because I've been doing it for so long. I think of it as writing and writing anecdotes and sharing what you were feeling during the experience. And so, people are pretty open. So I have I lead library groups. These people have never met, most of them have met each other in person. But they have warmed to the whole notion of sharing stories about themselves. And so they somehow managed to be okay with that. And I think partly because of, as a facilitator, I encourage people, you have to kind of create a safe place so that people aren't sitting there judging each other, about what they did earlier. It's just a story. It's not, it's not subject to anyone telling them what they should or shouldn't do. So I think that one of the things that works for memoir groups is because each person is in that exact same goal of sharing themselves. And when you're sharing yourself and you hear someone else sharing themselves, there's a kind of automatic bonding that's taking place. So it's not, you mentioned that you were joking, of course, but that, please don't read anything anymore thing with Jill. The thing about our normal social conventions is that we don't accept people having the stage floor for more than a moment or two. So you say something, how are you? Classic thing. Oh, I'm fine. It's like, well, that's a good answer because I don't really want to hear anymore. But so in normal social conversation, you might slip out like a little thing about what you've done in the past. But then let's move on. What about you? And so there is this give and take in normal dialogue that limits our bandwidth to each other to this tiny, tiny, tiny little thread. Whereas if you sit and read a book, you open the book, you're by yourself, you are willing to sit for an hour at a time. You want this person to tell you the story. So there's a vast difference between what we expect from each other in conversation versus what we're open to and willing to understand and accept in reading a well-crafted book. So the goal of all of this is to increase our bandwidth towards each other and be more willing to say, okay, well, and I am interested in you now. Well, oh, really? Well, what happened next? And so it's an expanding process, an expanding window into each other's lives. That's what gets me jazzed up about it.
Jerry, do you kind of, when you mentioned playing intellectual games, do you wish that you could go back and there could have been a different Jerry that didn't always play intellectual games? I wish we get all your facial expressions on camera, and because they're so telling.
The second part of your question has a different spin from what I expect from the first part. So do I wish I could go back and not play intellectual games?
No, it's not. No.
Okay.
But something more than that, because I think you feel like that
you not be a physics major?
No.
What do you mean intellectual games?
There were Jerry's words. He said that he played a lot of intellectual games, and he didn't. And where his other friends were playing games. Do you feel like you missed part of that? Is that, or does that matter?
Oh, well, so I'm philosophical about it. I mean, you can only be who you were. You can't change who you were. I can't change who I was. I missed out on an enormous part of being a kid. I mean, and that's really what I've kind of tried to make up for the last 50 plus years, is trying to kind of reconnect. So not only was I sort of obsessive about math and physics and being in my head, but I was also very shut off from the kind of warmth and social connection and just general sense of friendship. All the cool things that make childhood interesting were not accessible to me. So I, rather than going backwards to regret it, I've gone forward to kind of try to correct those deficits and love children and love being open to people and love love.
The reason that I asked you that question is because what concerns me, when you said that, it triggered a thought in me about the intellectual part of your youth, because I think sadly kids now are just shut in with that, trapped into their laptop or their iPad or their cell phone, and they're not interacting, not making eye contact, missing that part of their life, and that really does concern me, and that kids are going in that path. Just an observation I made in relationship to what you said.
And also tell Jerry what you do here at Villanova.
Well, I work with children on the spectrum, teaching them filmmaking, which I learned from Alan Shearer and Joe Frechie. 2 questions. Where would you suggest a person start who wanted to write their memoirs?
So if you look me up and look for memoir books, you'll find them on the internet. It's pretty friendly to that. So there's another one called Memoir Revolution, and I talk about the whole sort of psychological and sociological basis for a current interest in memoirs. I wrote a self-help book about overcoming reluctance to be a writer. So if you don't think you're a writer but you want to be, how to become a heroic writer. Just tries to bring that to light. And then 2 memoirs of my own. One about my college years, thinking my way to the end of the world, and one about my adult life of trying to overcome all of that, called How I Learned to Love the World. So where would somebody start? I would say it's a journey, and if you start with one anecdote but just write it, that's a pretty good start. There's tons of stuff all over the internet about writing a memoir. There didn't used to be. It's only been like the last 20, 25 years where it's just exploded. But learn to write anecdotes, maybe get together with some friends, ask at your local library, contact me on my website.
Did you kind of like have a mind-altering experience when you're 50 that caused you to want to get why counseling? I mean, you go from a physicist to counseling. What happened?
Well, so I've been studying. So when I came out of the collapse, I mean, sort of emotional collapse, major depressive episode, call it what you will, of the 60s, I, been spent like the next, 25, 30 years climbing back to my own good self. And that meant studying self-help, it meant journaling, it meant seeing a therapist for 20 years. And I realized that I had grown so much and that I had learned so much about who I was. I thought the next logical step was to figure out how to help other people. So kind of like the 12 steps thing of like the 12th step being to give back. I felt that if I'd always trusted school, I love school, and sort of going back to school and learning how to help other people become better people seemed like a cool thing to do for the next chapter in my life. And the beautiful thing about being a therapist is that we're required to do continuing education, and this is a fascinating time to be a therapist because there's a lot of innovation and a lot of systems that are been developed in the last 10 or 20 years. So I just keep an open mind to the innovations in the field.
And do you do 100% one-on-one, or do you also do group therapy?
So my therapy practice is one-on-one, but I do lots and lots of memoir groups, and from a kind of covert, they were there to write memoirs, but in a kind of covert way. I've always felt that people are growing. I don't use any of the tools for my therapy training. I just go straight to the memoir, but in them finding their stories, I see them growing in a healthy way.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Legacy. I've thought a lot about that.
That might be the best question of the day.
and the hardest one to answer. I mean, one of the amazing things about getting old is that you never ever ever want to admit that you're getting old. And so being 77, it's starting to get harder to admit that. And when I look at my life and how much I have benefited from the legacy of others, it's just unbelievable. I mean, I'm feeling my eyes well up with tears thinking about, people that have left behind their lessons, their learning, their being, that what they've offered. And so I guess one of the cool things about writing a book is that it lives longer than the person does. So I'd like to think that my books could be a legacy. John, you could have a storytelling radio show. You could record your stories and then transcribe them and put them in the book.
That's a great idea.
Do it.
See, I knew there was a reason you should be here.
We're doing this ad lib thing, right? So we're doing these, what comes to mind, and that's a powerful way to share stuff. And this sort of writing it and developing it and revising it and then shaping it is another way. And it's just kind of building towards, helping people understand each other. So
that's really what's important.
I just wanted to say your last book was extraordinary in that every chapter really led to you wanting to read the next chapter. Is that a skill that you just developed, or did someone teach you that? Or how did you develop your writing skills to be such a fabulous writer?
Well, I mean, and that's part of the 20-year journey of writing it, is to develop an understanding. So I spent my life reading. I love books. I love what they do when you read a book, how it takes you on this journey. And I knew when I wrote a book, I wanted to be able to do that. So you study with people who have done it, and you try it, and then you ask people if it carries them along, and then people will sort of give you feedback, and they say, well, I get kind of lost there, or that anecdote doesn't really fit, or, then you start to understand how chapters have beginning, middle, and end, and so it's a developing crafting process, and thanks for appreciating that.
How long did it take you to write that book? And there's obviously takes people anywhere.
Yeah.
0 to 20 years.
They use a typewriter. It'll take it forever.
But how long did it, just out of curiosity?
So I started the idea or understanding that I wanted to do it in 2002, and I just published it in 2024. So I guess 22 years, but of course during that time I was learning how to write stories. I was learning I had to go and do all the introspective work of trying to understand those different portions of my life, and then how did I want to shape that into a book, and then and then shape it, and then find out if that worked, and so on and so on. So it's just it's a process. It's like climbing a mountain. You start from wherever you are, and you just start climbing.
And I think it's a great story, as being at Villanova, for students to read, because it is a time in your life when you go to college to learn who you are, what you want to be. For some children it is a straight line, but for most students it's not a straight line to success, to happiness in life. And there are bumps in the road. Get his book, read it. It's really, really worthwhile.
Until next time, this is John Ricciutti with co-host and director Jill Frechie. We are WXVU.org.